My name is Melvin. I'm 68 years old, and I've lived most of my life in Billings, Montana. I was married to the same woman for almost 40 years. I raised my daughter with all the care that a man can give. And after she grew up, well, that's why I'm telling this story. Have you ever been called a burden by someone you raised with love? Have you ever felt that everything you built became a burden in the hands of those who should honor you? I wonder that to this day. Because when we get older, we don't expect applause. But he also does not expect to be treated as a nuisance within his own family. There are things that don't make sense, like someone forgetting where they came from, forgetting who was always there. I thought love was enough, that presence was enough, but it seems that there are people who only see value when you pay the bill. Today, I'm going to tell you what happened when my daughter kicked me out of the house I helped keep, and what I did, in silence, when I found out that she and her husband were about to travel with $20,000 of my own. The worst pain is not being forgotten. It is to be remembered as a nuisance. But before we dive into the heart of this story, I need you to know something. There was a day, my own birthday, when my daughter looked me in the eye and called me dead weight. The words were not spoken in the heat of a fight, nor in a moment of anger. They were cold, calculated, thrown over me like someone who dumps an old object in the trash. And it was there, that night, that something inside me broke. Or maybe it did. The next day, she and her husband thought they would be embarking for Hawaii, first-class, hotel by the sea, all paid for by me. But that day, I did something that no one expected, and that was just the beginning. If you're here listening to this, it's because perhaps at some point in your life, you were also hurt by someone who swore to love you. So I want to ask you, from the bottom of my heart, if this story touches something inside you, support me with a like, with your subscription, not as someone who clicks a button, but as someone who says, I understand you, Melvin. It tells everything. I'm here with you. Because today, I'll tell you. When I moved in with Ashley and Cole, I thought it was just a phase. I had sold my house after Rose, my wife, left. I thought it made sense to be closer to my daughter, to help with the bills, to share what was left of her retirement. The house was big, with 3 bedrooms, and I stayed with the one in the back, where I looked at it and immediately thought, it's only until they get better organized. Then everything gets on track. But the rails, as I realized, led nowhere. My day started early. It has always been like this. I woke up before the sun, put the kettle on the stove, and prepared coffee with that care of someone who respects the silence of the morning. I would take the newspaper, yes, I still sign printed, and sit on the back porch. From there I could see the garden, which I took care of myself for months. I planted lavender, tomatoes, mint. He pruned the trees, swept the leaves, all without asking for anything. I just wanted to be useful. At first, Ashley would even say, "Thank you, Dad," when she saw the yard clean. Then it was just a raise of eyebrows. Later on, not even that. Cole walked past me with his cell phone in his hand, earphone in his ear, as if I were invisible. He didn't answer good morning. Sometimes, if I tried to start a conversation, he would say, "I'm busy right now, Melvin." Melvin, neither father nor lord. Melvin, like I was a roommate in a college dorm. There was a day when the house alarm went off at dawn. I had gone to get a glass of water in the kitchen. I forgot to deactivate the sensor. The noise was hellish. Ashley came down the stairs furious. She didn't even give me a chance to explain. "Dad, you need to learn how to use things. This is not your old house. It's not that difficult." I kept silent. I went to the bedroom and sat on the edge of the bed, feeling my throat close as if I had swallowed a stone. And it wasn't just that. I tried from time to talk, to tell a story of the time when Rose and I were traveling in an RV through Arizona, or about the first job I had in a workshop in Great Falls. Ashley rolled her eyes. Cole let out a muffled laugh. "Here comes the History Channel," he once said. I felt the blood heat up, but I kept quiet. It's strange how we start to measure words inside our own house. I weighed each sentence before I opened my mouth. Sometimes he spent the whole day without talking to anyone, just listening to the ticking of the kitchen clock, a watch that I hung myself. I was present but not included. It was like an old piece of furniture in the corner of the room, still useful, but out of place. There was a day when I went to the post office to pick up a package. When I returned, Ashley was sitting with a friend in the living room. I entered with a smile, said, "Good afternoon." The two replied with a hurried nod. Before I could ask how the day went, I heard the friend ask in a low voice, "And what is it like to live with him now?" Ashley replied, "Yes, an adaptation. We do what we can, right? Like I'm a burden, a task." I went up to the room with the box in my hands and sat on the bed. I remember looking around and everything there was mine, the quilt that Rose sewed, the books I kept for so many years, even the lamp on the bedside. But what I felt was that I didn't belong. And it is at this point that the pain begins to change shape. It stops being sadness and begins to turn into silence. And allow me to pause here, because maybe you've felt something similar, not being heard, not being welcome in a place where you've invested everything of yourself. And that makes me wonder, how many people live like this? How many fathers and mothers who gave everything today live quietly in forgotten rooms of houses they helped to build? If this part touched you, comment here with a simple, "I've lived it," or "It touched me." Sometimes we just need to know that we are not alone in this. I walked around the garden again in the late afternoons. It was the only place where he still felt a little peace. The smell of the earth, the singing of birds, the leaves dancing in the wind. They reminded me that there was still life outside the walls of that house. I watered the plants as if watering memories, trying to keep some part of myself alive, but inside, the ice grew. And it only took Ashley's look for me to understand that anything I did or didn't do was too much. A forgotten cloth over the sink, a badly closed tap, an innocent comment on the news. Everything turned into sighing impatience and then silence, a kind of silence that does not welcome, that pushes, until the eve of my birthday arrived. A Saturday. I woke up early, as always. I prepared the coffee. I buttered the bread, left it for them on the table. I tried to start a conversation about having a barbecue on Sunday, inviting my old friends. Ashley just said, "I don't know if it's going to work." Cole didn't even answer. And that's when I realized something inside that house was about to burst. I didn't know how or when, but you could feel it in the air. It was like the smell of heavy rain before the storm, and it was the next day, on my own birthday, that everything collapsed for good. Do you want to know what she said to me that day, and what did I do soon after when I understood that I no longer had a place there? So wait, because now comes the part that even I didn't think I would have the courage to tell. On Sunday morning, the day of my birthday, I woke up with a tightness in my chest and a stubborn desire to make that day light, despite everything. I already felt deep down that there would be no party, no surprise, no cake with a candle. But still, I prepared a simple list: sausage, bread, corn, soda. I called 3 longtime friends, Bill, Frank and Jimmy, companions of many years at the factory. Simple men like me, who never demanded anything, but were always around when life was tight. They accepted the invitation with enthusiasm. "We're finally going to miss that barbecue of yours, Melvin." That's what Bill said. That gave me a little encouragement. I decided to go to the supermarket in person, buy everything. At breakfast, in a soft voice, I asked Ashley, "Daughter, can you take me to Albertsons in no time? Just some shopping for today's barbecue." She didn't even look up from her phone. "Dad, today I have a full day. Serious. It won't work." I stood still for a moment, waiting for maybe "but if it's fast, I'll try." Nothing. Just silence. Cole, who was in the room, laughed and blurted out, "Hey, Melvin, do you still drive? Or do you want me to be your private Uber now? I'm not available for needy seniors, no." That hit hard. Not so much for the rudeness, but for the naturalness with which he came. As if I really were a nuisance asking for too much. I took a deep breath, swallowed hard, and thanked him. I went to my room, grabbed my wallet, and called a taxi. 15 minutes later, I was sitting in the back seat of an old sedan, looking out the window at the streets of the city in which I had lived all my life. But that morning, they looked like they were from a strange place. For years, I was the one who drove for everyone. Appointments, school, airport. I was the one who ran to buy Christmas decorations, lunch meat, medicines that no one remembered to take. Now I was there, as a passenger in his own story, paying to be taken on a route that would previously be natural between father and daughter. At the grocery store, I walked slowly through the aisles, choosing carefully. I took everything that was on the list and even added a cheap wine. Not to toast, but to see if the taste softened something inside. I returned to the taxi carrying the bags with effort. No one to help. I came home sweating, with my shirt sticking to my back, and left everything in the kitchen. Ashley walked past me, looked quickly and said, "I don't even know if we'll be here in the afternoon. We have some commitments." I still insisted. I invited Bill, Frank, and Jimmy. "Let's just bake a few things in the backyard, reminisce about the old days." She shrugged. "Do it, Dad. But no fuss, please." I went outside, cleaned the barbecue, set up the chairs, spread the table with the checkered tablecloth that Rose liked to use. For a moment, looking at everything arranged, I felt a good warmth in my chest. I remembered old birthdays, when Ashley would run around with the cake in her hands, laughing, and I would make bad jokes that everyone pretended to find funny. But it was enough for me to go back inside to feel that cold again. The absence of what was once love. At 2 in the afternoon, friends began to arrive. Bill brought boiled potatoes. Jimmy came with a toolbox. "If you need something, just call." And Frank brought old photos. We sat in the garden, turned on the radio quietly, and began to remember. It was one of the few moments of real laughter I've had in recent months. But this peace did not last. At one point, I went to the kitchen to get more glasses, and heard Cole remark to Ashley in the hallway, "This looks like an asylum meeting." She replied, laughing, "And the worst thing is that he thinks he's rocking this retiree barbecue." I stopped. I didn't get in. I stood there, motionless, with 2 plastic cups in my hands and a lump in my throat. I went back to the backyard, smiling. No one noticed. I didn't let him, because there are things that we learn to hide. In the late afternoon, when the friends left, grateful, with eyes moist with memory, Ashley didn't even show up to say goodbye. Cole stayed on the couch, playing video games. I went up to the room in silence. I sat on the edge of the bed, leaned my head against the wall, and stood there, looking at the ceiling. I didn't cry, but inside me, something gave way, a kind of rupture. It was at that moment that I understood. The problem was not the barbecue, nor the age, nor the routine. The problem was me. I was the nuisance. I was what they didn't want to see there anymore. But what they didn't know. It's just that from then on I would also change, because there are birthdays that don't bring gifts, they bring decisions. And the next day, I would take the first one, the one that would start it all. Do you want to know what I did right after? So listen. Because what comes next is going to change everything. I can still hear Jimmy's laugh when he told the story of the broken elevator in the old factory for the 1,000th time. We laughed together, not for the novelty, but for the memory. They were the laughter of those who survived a lot. There, in my small backyard, with the breeze blowing lightly and the smell of roasting meat, I almost managed to forget that inside that house lived contempt. Almost. I remember well the time when I walked over to the sliding door of the living room, wiped my hands on the cloth, and called out, "Ashley, Cole, the food is ready. Come join us." She didn't even take her eyes off her cell phone. He said in a dry tone, "This geriatric meeting does not interest me." What hurt the most was not the sentence. It was the tone, like someone who rejects a pamphlet on the street, as if to say, "That's none of my business." Before I could answer, "Cole, with that crooked smile that always bothered me, let out loudly for all to hear. "It looks like a retiree convention. Will there be bingo after meat?" He laughed, as if it were the best joke in the world. And I stood still, the door ajar. My friends listened. I felt it. Their laughter stopped. The mood has turned, but no one commented. They only exchanged glances, the kind that say more than words. I returned to the backyard with a steady face. I served the wine, cut the meats, made jokes, kept laughing, but inside I was no longer there. We learn over the years to smile with our mouths while our hearts are silent. I served each one of them as if it were a feast, when deep down I felt like locking myself in the room and forgetting that day existed. Bill looked me in the eye and said, "You've always been the strongest of us, Melvin." I didn't know what to answer. I just raised my glass. When the afternoon fell, one by one, he left. Jimmy hugged me tightly. Frank, who barely speaks, patted me twice on the back. And Bill, already at the gate, looked toward the house and said quietly, almost in a whisper, "They don't know what they've got." I just nodded. I closed the gate, went to collect the plates, the glasses. I kept what was left of the meat, folded the tablecloth calmly. The breeze now seemed colder, and then I heard her footsteps coming from the room. Ashley came into the kitchen, crossed her arms, looked at me with that tired expression, as if I were a late employee. "Dad, listen. Cole and I talked. We think it's time for you to think of another place to stay. It's done, you know?" It took me a while to understand. Not because of the surprise, because deep down I expected it, but because of the way she said it, without hesitation. No guilt, like someone who asks you to turn off the light when you leave. Another place to stay. It's enough. I stood there, with the tea towel in my hand, the smell of barbecue still impregnated in the clothes, and she was waiting for me to thank her for the warning. I didn't answer. I just looked around. The kitchen, the watch that I hung myself, the chairs I helped assemble when they moved. Every corner of that house had a piece of me, and yet I was a stranger there. Ashley turned her back, as if fulfilling a difficult but necessary task. And at that moment, it wasn't the abandonment that hurt the most. It was the coldness, the absence of any shadow of love. I went up to the room in silence. I closed the door slowly. I sat on the bed and looked at the suitcases that I never completely unpacked, as if I knew from the beginning that this room was just a break. I took Rose's photo on the dresser. She smiled as she always did, as if to say, "Don't forget who you are." And there that night, I decided I wouldn't forget. But before leaving for good, there was still one thing I needed to do, one last answer. Not with words, but with action. Do you know what it was? So listen carefully, because what I did the next day, none of them saw coming. I went up to the room slowly, as if I knew I'm leaving for good. I didn't slam the door, I didn't make a scene. I just collected my few things, one by one, folding the clothes as my mother taught me back in the days when respect was still the rule at home. I took my old suitcase, the dark leather one with a crooked handle, which I kept for decades only for when it was really needed. It was small, but I could fit everything I had left. 2 pants, 3 shirts, my medicines, the notebook where I write down birthdays and expenses, and Rose's photo. This one I put very carefully in a thick envelope so as not to wrinkle. She was smiling in that 1982 portrait in front of the trailer, with her hair tied up and the sun in her eyes. I also took the toothbrush, of course. A man can lose everything, but dignity cannot. Before going downstairs, I looked at the room one more time. It had a chair in the corner, a half-lit lamp, and the quilt I bought at the flea market shortly after I moved in. Nothing more. And even so, it was the only space in the house where I still breathed without having to ask permission. I took the key to the bedroom door and left it on top of the dresser. It was a silly symbol, perhaps, but I wanted to show it. I don't owe anything else here. I went down with my suitcase, dragging across the carpet. Ashley was sitting on the couch, pretending to watch TV, but I know she heard my footsteps. Cole didn't even pretend. He stood with his phone in his hand, playing some stupid game, as he always did when he wanted to look too busy for real life. I stopped in the center of the room. I placed the house key on the coffee table. I did it slowly, so that the sound of the key touching the wood would say what I no longer needed to say. Ashley looked on with an air of rehearsed surprise. "Dad, where are you going?" I just stared at it. Neither anger nor sadness, only silence. A heavy silence, full of unspoken words. Cole didn't even look up. That marked me more than any curse. I opened the front door. The wind from Billings was cold, biting, as it usually is in late autumn. But for the first time, the air seemed light to me. I walked down the steps with firm steps. The suitcase made a dry sound against the sidewalk, each wheel dragging my past along with it. No one ran after it. No one called my name. The house was left behind as a bad memory. And I walked down the street with my head held high and my chest aching, but in a new, almost liberating way. I took the first taxi that passed. The driver was a young man, quiet, with a backwards cap. He asked me where I was going. I replied, "Pine Tree Lodge, there at the south exit." It was a simple motel. One of those roadside motels that serve watery coffee and have a carpet with a musty smell. But at that moment, it looked like a palace, because it was mine, because no one was going to measure me or tell me to be quiet. When we arrived, I paid in cash. I carried my suitcase alone to room number 7. Inside, the place was cramped with peeling walls and a noisy heater in the corner. But he had a clean bed, a small window, and a silence that didn't hurt. I sat down. I opened the suitcase. I took Rose's picture and put it on the headboard. "I'm here, honey," I said in a low voice. And at that moment, a strange feeling came to me, as if I had returned home, even though I didn't have one. I stood there, sitting on the edge of the bed, staring at the ceiling, listening to the distant noise of the highway, thinking about all that I had carried for so many years. I carried bills, problems, pains that were not mine. I carried the whole family on my back, and when it was no longer useful, I was discarded. But do you know what's curious? Instead of feeling destroyed, I felt light, as if the hard floor of that cheap room gave me back something I didn't even remember I had anymore. Space, room to breathe, to think, to decide. And that's why I'm here, opening my heart, telling my story the way it was. Because I know there are people on the other side who have been through this, or that it will still pass. And if you've been here with me so far, listening to me, leave a like on this video and subscribe to the channel. It is not by number, nor by vanity. It's just so I know there's someone out there on the other side saying, "Go, Melvin," continues, "I'm with you." Because look, I still have a lot in store to tell you. And that night, lying in an unfamiliar bed, listening to the cars pass by outside, I made the first note in the notebook that had been closed for months. Melvin, day 1. From then on, I was no longer the weight. I was the starting point. And the next day, very early, I would make a decision that would change everything. Do you know what it was? So listen to me, because that's when justice begins to be born in silence. The night was long, one of those in which the body even tries to rest, but the head doesn't let it. I lay on that hard bed at the Pine Tree Lodge Motel with the muffled sound of the road outside and the hum of the old heater keeping me company. The ceiling had a crack that ran from one end to the other like an open scar, and I stood there, staring at that crooked line, trying to figure out where it was that everything broke between me and Ashley. I didn't cry. I couldn't. It was as if the crying had run out years ago and only emptiness remained. But inside the chest, the pain was dull, thick, like a knot that does not go down and does not disappear either. I got out of bed in the middle of the night. The dim light from the lamp barely illuminated the room, but I could see enough. I opened my suitcase, took out the brown notebook that I have kept since 1989, where I write down everything, from household expenses to small souvenirs. I ran through the yellowed pages until I reached a blank space and wrote, very slowly, all that I gave, and I started the pain inventory. First came Cole's car, a brand new SUV, which I bought when he was promoted. He said he needed a better vehicle to impress at work. I paid in cash, $17,000. I never got a penny back. Then I wrote down Ashley's 4 years of college, courses, materials, student housing, transportation. I added it all up, $46,000. I remembered the day she graduated. I was there in a suit and tie with my eyes teary with pride, and now she looks at me like I'm a burden. I continued writing. Wedding gifts, $9,000. From the buffet to the honeymoon trip, everything came out of my pocket. And finally, the renovation of their house, the same one where I was called dead weight. Floor replacement, painting, new appliances, $12,000. A part of me wanted to stop taking notes. It hurt too much. But I continued. Not to charge, not to rub in the face, but because I needed to remember. I needed to see with my own eyes that my whole life was a surrender, and that this surrender had been stepped on. I closed the notebook. I lay down again. I didn't sleep. I just waited for the day to dawn, my chest burning slowly, as if each memory was an ember lit inside. When the sun began to enter through the crack of the cheap curtain, I got up slowly. I went to the mirror that was on top of the sink. It was small, with stains on the glass. I looked at myself for a while, the deep dark circles under the eyes, thinning hair, the wrinkles in the corner of the eyes. But what caught my attention the most was the way I looked at myself, as if he saw me for the first time in a long time, and that's when I said, "Lo, just for me." 2 words. But they seem to have been kept for a lifetime. Enough, Melvin. And in that enough, there was everything. There was an end to fear, the end of guilt, the end of silence. Now, with my suitcase still leaning against the wall and the city waking up outside, I knew what was next. It would not be screaming, nor revenge, but something much more accurate, much deeper. Because that same day I would look at something that everyone thought I had forgotten, but that I was just waiting for the right moment to use it. Do you know what it was? So pay attention, because the tables were about to turn. The morning was cold, but inside me there was a fire burning. After staring at that cracked mirror and saying enough, I knew exactly where to go. I dressed calmly, flannel shirt, old jacket, and went to the bus stop with my suitcase still closed in the corner of the room. Not because I intended to return home, but because I was now carrying another baggage. And it is not measured in clothes or objects. It was a baggage of conscience, of dignity. I got off near the city centre. I walked to the First Montana Bank branch, where I've had an account since 1976, the same bank where I deposited my first salary. I went in and went straight to the counter. The manager was a young man in a blue blazer with starched hair and an insurance salesman's smile. "Good morning, Mr. Melvin. What can I help with?" I sat down slowly. I opened the notebook. I took out a paper with notes, and he said in a firm voice, "I want to cancel all access linked to my account. Additional cards, automatic transfers, everything." He hesitated. "Are you sure? Can I know why?" I looked him right in the eyes. "Yes, I do. Too late, but I have it." I signed what I needed to sign. A form here, a password there. When I finished, the guy told me that Ashley and Cole's cards would be deactivated right away. I felt a weight coming off my back. It was as if, finally, I had locked a door that had been creaking for years. I took my coat, thanked him, and left, with firmer steps. I walked to the corner cafe and ordered an espresso. I opened my cell phone, something I rarely did outside the house. I typed in the browser, "Airline plus my account." I entered the reservation I had made months earlier. 2 first-class tickets to Honolulu, round trip, 5-star hotel, helicopter ride, romantic dinner. A gift I had bought for their wedding anniversary. $20,000. Money that I saved for years, penny by penny. Because, despite everything, I still wanted to see them happy. I still believed that love paid any bill. But that morning, my heart no longer asked for forgiveness. He asked for justice. I took a deep breath, pressed the button. Cancel reservation. The screen flashed. Then came the confirmation, cancellation completed. Amount will be refunded. And there, in the silence of that coffee shop, with the coffee steam rising slowly, I felt more alive than I had in many years. Maybe you think that was revenge, but no, that was protection, self-preservation, and maybe if you've ever been used by someone who claimed to love you, you understand too. There are people who don't feel it until they lose, and there are pains that we don't explain. We interrupt. I remember well the moment I left the cafe. The sun was starting to warm the sidewalk and my cell phone vibrated in my pocket. Once, two, three, a sequence that did not stop. Notifications, calls. Ashley, Cole. Unknown to me at that moment, because the masks fall off when the money runs out. And look, if you've come this far with me, listening to this story, remember what I'm going to tell you now. The most memorable moment is yet to come. Because there are things that hurt, but there are others that transform. And what happened after this cancellation was exactly that, a transformation. Not only theirs, but mine, because they could have it all. But they never imagined what it was like to lose the man who was always behind everything. The phone kept vibrating. But me, I just looked out the cafe window, put the phone face down on the table, and smiled for the first time in a long time. Now he answers me one thing. What does a daughter and son-in-law do when the ground they walked on was supported by what they called dead weight? The answer, it will surprise you. The phone rang non-stop. Short vibes, then long ones, then messages. I knew that sooner or later she would call, and when it rang for the 12th time, I answered, not out of anger, nor out of haste. I answered because at that moment, I already had enough peace to listen to everything she wanted to evict. "Dad, what did you do?" Her voice came squeaky, full of an urgency that she never used to listen to me. "My car didn't go through the store. The travel reservation is gone. It was you, right?" I remained silent for a few seconds. You could hear the sound of hurried footsteps and horns in the background. She must have been in some mall, trying to buy something else with the money I always left there, quietly, like someone who leaves fresh bread in the cupboard, even when no one thanks her. "Dad, say something," she insisted. That's when I said, "What's it like to be rejected at the checkout?" Silence, a short silence, which hurt more than any answer. But soon came the explosion. "You destroyed everything. Have you always been a burden and now you want to play the victim? Do you think it's beautiful to let us down? Do you think it's fair?" She spoke as if she had never stopped to listen to herself. No, there are things that we only understand when we hear it coming from the mouth of those who created it. When she said, "You have always been a burden," it was as if all the wounds I carried had been named at once. There, without anesthesia. And there were no tears. There was only a deeper breath, a pause between the ribs. So I replied calmly, "You called me heavy." Now she felt what it is like to be left without support. And after that, the other side of the line went silent. Not one more sound, not a sigh. She hung up, or maybe he stayed there trying to find what to say. But it was too late. Listen to me for a minute. When we give too much out of love, out of zeal, out of care, we run the risk of being mistaken for obligation. And when the obligation stops, the recipient rebels, not for lack, but for habit. It's a scare for those who have never had to build what they consume. If it reminded you of something, if at any point in your life you felt that it was just a bridge for others to cross and then leave you behind, comment here. It says I understand you, it's true, I know how it is. Because this story, it's mine, but maybe it's yours too. That day after the call, I turned off the cell phone and put it in airplane mode. I went walking through the streets of Billings as someone who relearns to walk with his own legs. I bought an old newspaper at a newsstand, sat on a bench in the central square, ordered a hot dog with little mustard, and stayed there. The sky was clear, the trees were starting to lose their leaves, and for the first time I was just Melvin, not the provider, not the guilty parent, not the unwanted guest, just a man sitting, at peace with his silence. But what I didn't expect, it was what would come the next morning, because when they understood that I wasn't going to go back, they began to move, and the way they tried to regain control, oh, you're going to want to hear that, because that's where the game really turned. The next morning arrived with a cloudy sky and a different silence, those that do not weigh, but that prepare the ground. I woke up early, had a lukewarm coffee at the motel reception, and put on my best shirt, the light blue one, with the mother-of-pearl buttons that Rose gave me on any given Christmas. I walked to the bus stop and went straight to the center of Billings. I got off near 27th Street, in front of the office building where a lawyer named Walter Sloan worked, a middle-aged man, discreet, with a calm voice and attentive eyes. I had already dealt with it some time ago when I needed to register Ashley's house in my name before transferring it as a gift. He remembered me. I walked into his office and explained bluntly what I wanted. "Mr. Sloan, I want to rewrite my will." He adjusted his glasses, made that formal pause of someone who is used to widows and simple inheritances. "Do you want to leave everything to your daughter, as before?" I shook my head. "No, that's over." He sat in his chair. "Can I ask why?" I took a deep breath. "Because my daughter doesn't need my money. It needs a lesson." And with those words, I began to narrate, calmly, without drama, but with the firmness of someone who had been betrayed by creation itself. I explained that I wanted to create a fund aimed at elderly men and women who, like me, had been pushed out of their families, who now lived in cramped rooms in motels or depended on social workers to survive. People who built lives, supported children, helped grandchildren, and that, in the end, was treated as a nuisance. Walter listened to me in silence. He wrote everything down. Sometimes he stopped, looked at me, and went back to writing. "I have contacts with some organizations. I can help you structure this so that the fund is continuous even after you're gone." I nodded. "That's what I want. May the good continue even when I stop." It took us almost 3 hours between papers, records, names, clauses. At the end, he handed me a copy. "It's here, Mr. Melvin, will revoked. New document signed, registered, valid. Your daughter is no longer a beneficiary." I picked up the papers with steady hands. I stood up. "Thank you very much." He added, "It's not common to see parents make decisions like that." I smiled slightly. "It is also not common to see children forget who raised the roof where they sleep." I left there with the folded papers in my coat pocket. I walked to a small coffee shop, ordered a chamomile tea, and stared at the street. The city remained the same. Cars coming and going, people passing in a hurry. But inside me, something had changed. I was no longer the man who tried to return home. Now, I was the man who was building another one, and this time it would be for people who have never seen me, but who may need me more than my own daughter. I returned to the motel in the late afternoon. I went up to room number 7, sat on the edge of the bed and took the papers out of my pocket. I put them next to Rose's photo, as if to say, "We still make a difference, honey," because I knew that if she had been alive, she would have hugged me right away. And who knows, said, "It took a while, but you understood." The truth is that justice sometimes doesn't make noise. He doesn't scream, he doesn't punch the table, he doesn't cause scandal. Real justice is silent, firm, and when it comes, he does not apologize. And it was in this silence that I started to sleep better. But the curious thing is that the further I got away from them, the more they seemed to want to come back. And then another part of this story began. Because there are people who only realize the value of a presence when he feels the weight of absence, and when Ashley realized what she missed, did something I never expected. Want to know what it was? So stay here with me, because it will mess with you. It was almost noon when I heard the shrill horn outside, right at the entrance to Pine Tree Lodge. I looked through the bedroom window, thinking it was just another guest in a hurry. But no, there was Cole, standing next to the sports car that I myself helped pay for, with my face red and my eyes bulging, like a boy who had his favorite toy taken from his hands. He slammed the door hard, crossed the parking lot, and came straight towards me. I didn't even wait for them to knock. I opened the door first. I stood there, standing in front of the room, with the sun beating down on my face and my heart pounding, not with fear, but with firmness. He came too close, with his finger raised. "Have you gone crazy? What are you trying to prove with this little show?" He spat the words as if trying to intimidate. I didn't move. "You cancelled everything, the trip, the cards, even the hotel reservation. Ashley and I are going to lose everything because of you." I just stared, without saying a word. It was the first time he had seen me standing without lowering my head, and it seems that this has unbalanced him even more. "You're going to call that bank now. You're going to say you're confused. You're going to undo this ridiculous drama. Go reconnect the cards and apologize to Ashley." He took a step, and when I realized, his hand was already grabbing my shirt at chest level. It was fast. But before anything worse happened, a cry came from behind. "Hey, let him go now." It was the taxi driver who had dropped me off there on the first day. A young man in his early 30s named Lucas. He had stopped the car at the entrance, saw the scene, and came without thinking. He pushed Cole back slightly. "Are you crazy? Are you going to lay a hand on a gentleman?" Cole tried to resist, but the boy put his arm in and added, "Not here. It won't be like that here." Cole walked away, embarrassed, looking around as if looking for someone to support him. But there was only the wind, the strong sun, and the eyes of those who watch from afar and understand more than it seems. "You're going to regret it, old man. You'll regret letting us down," he shouted before getting into the car, starting with a start that raised dust on the asphalt. I stood there for a few seconds, trying to understand what had just happened. Lucas looked at me, lowered his tone, and said, "Is he your relative?" I took a deep breath. It was meant to be. He nodded silently. Then he said, "If you need a ride, just call." And he left. I returned to the room with my legs a little shaky, not because of weakness, but because of the symbolic weight of it all. For the first time, someone defended me. Someone who didn't have my blood, who didn't owe me anything. And it was precisely this stranger who saw what my own family ignored, my dignity. I sat on the edge of the bed, my heart racing but my spirit calm. I took the glass of water, drank it slowly, looked at Rose's photo and said, "You would be proud of me today." And look, if this piece of my life can become a mirror or a hug for someone, help me carry it forward. Like and subscribe here to the channel. It makes more difference than you think. Sometimes, just knowing that there is someone listening, we already feel less alone in this world. But going back, I knew that Cole's attack wasn't the end. It was just the beginning. Because now, with the money out of reach and the privileges slipping through their hands, they would do anything to recover what they lost. What I didn't expect was that the next step would come with another face, a face I hadn't seen in years. And when she showed up at the motel gate, the world stopped for a moment. Do you know who it was? So hold on, because the next chapter will hurt, and at the same time, it will heal. The next morning, I decided to walk to the Main Street Diner, an old cafe in downtown Billings, one of those that resist time with walls full of black and white photos and the smell of bacon in the air. Rose and I had coffee there every Saturday morning, when Ashley still wore braids and drew hearts on her napkins. I went in and sat at the same table in the corner, near the window. It didn't take long for someone to pull up the chair in front of me without asking permission. Only those who are intimate do that. It was Henry, an old friend from the factory days. His hair was all white, his spine curved, but his eyes were as firm as ever. "I hear you're back in town," he said. I nodded, and it seems that it came back with history, There, in that modest cafe, with the old kettle sizzling on the counter and the radio playing jazz in the background, I told you everything, from start to finish. The sale of the house, Ashley's move to Ashley's house, Cole's look of contempt, the birthday that turned into humiliation, the suitcase, the motel, the will. I told it without haste, the way we tell it when the other really listens. And he listened. Without interrupting me, without looking surprised. He only lowered his head a few times, scratched his chin silently, and kept his eyes on mine. When I finished, he was silent for a few seconds. Then he blurted out in a hoarse voice, "You did what none of us had the courage to do." That caught me in a good way. "What do you mean?" I asked. He took a deep breath. "We grew up thinking that being a father was being a wall. Hold on in silence. Never break. But one day the wall cracks, Melvin. And when it cracks, nobody wants to fix it. They just want to build another one on top." I kept looking at him with a tightness in my chest, because there in that simple phrase, there was a whole world of parents who held the world in their arms, and then they were left aside as if they were old furniture. Some customers started to pay attention to our conversation. A gentleman at the next table raised his mug and said, "You're not alone, mate." A white-haired woman sitting near the cashier approached and put her hand on my shoulder. "My father went through the same. You're stronger than you think." Gradually, people who had never seen me began to see something that my daughter never wanted to see. That behind a silent old man, it has a whole man. And look, if you're still here with me, listening to every bit of this story, let me tell you something important. The deepest moment is yet to come. Because it's one thing to be rejected by the one you love. Other, it is to discover that even so, there are people ready to see you with truth. That changes everything. It heals. So stay with me until the end. Because what came after that conversation in the cafe, it was the beginning of something that even I didn't expect to live again. I left the Main Street diner with a lighter heart. The sun hit the sidewalk differently, and as I walked back to the motel, something inside me said that the worst was over. But then, the next day, someone knocked on my door, and what this person said in the first few seconds made my world stop for a moment. Do you know when you think you've heard it all? That's that. I thought so too, until that moment. That morning, the noise was not coming from the street. It came from my cell phone, a flood of notifications, as if suddenly the world had remembered that I existed. Messages, missed calls, audios. The name that appeared the most on the screen was Ashley's. I started to open them one by one, calmly. Not out of curiosity, but as someone who watches a repeated play, already knowing the entire script. The first was short and cold. "Dad, you're exaggerating." The second came with a more affected tone. "It was just a misunderstanding. We were nervous that day." Then came the most dramatic ones. "Dad, answer me, please. You know Cole has a bad way of talking, but he didn't mean to hurt you. We need to talk as a family." And then the audios of Cole himself began, trying to soften what was impossible to clean. "Mr. Melvin, look, we were under pressure. We didn't want it to get to that point. We can solve this, right, from man to man. I read everything, I heard everything in silence. I didn't feel angry. I felt sorry. Because there in those hasty words, there was more fear than remorse. They were not sorry for hurting me. They were terrified that they no longer knew how to live without the support I had always given. It was absence, not guilt, that was hurting them. There was a message that almost made me laugh, so desperate. "We're about to be evicted, Dad. The rent is late. You're not going to let that happen to us, are you?" They never asked if I had a place to sleep. They never cared if I had anything to eat. But it was enough for the rope to tighten on the other side. And they became children, knocking on the door of the lap that always held them. The truth is that I became invisible to them the moment I stopped paying for everything. And now that I also disappeared in my pocket, it was as if I had died. But for them, this death was a tragedy, because it meant they would have to grow up. And growing hurts more than losing. Instead of answering, I closed the cell phone, put it in airplane mode, left it on the dresser, and went for a walk around the city. Autumn was already beginning to paint the trees red and gold. The ground crackled under my steps. Each fallen leaf reminded me of a small decision I made throughout my life, and that even hurting brought me here. I kept remembering when Ashley was little, from when she ran to my lap because a boy took her toy at school, the first time he fell on his bike, and I stood there on the side, kneeling on the ground, holding his hand until the pain passed. The memories come back out of nowhere, right? And when they come back, they seem more alive than what we live today. Sometimes all we have left are these pieces, glow-in-the-dark fragments. Tell me something. Do you also keep this type of memory? A moment that was recorded, a scene that never left your head? Share it with me in the comments. I swear I'll read it. Right there, I also remember, or I've been through this. If something here brought you an old memory. And you know, as I walked among those dry leaves, I realized something. My silence was speaking louder than any sermon. He was the one who was teaching. He was the one who showed the value that I always had and that they never knew how to recognize. Because the absence of those who sustain, it is always the beginning of collapse. And they were falling apart, without needing me to touch anything. I returned to the motel with my face cold from the wind, but my chest warm with dignity. I took Rose's picture, smiled at her and said softly, "You saw what it became, right, honey?" But that's when the landline phone in the room rang, and I knew that on the other end of that line, it was no longer just despair. It was something bigger, something that would change the course of history again. Can you imagine who reached out to me this time? The answer will hurt more than any message. I was walking back from the bakery, holding a paper bag with 2 loaves of bread still warm, when I saw the "For Rent" sign swinging slowly at the gate of a small house on the south side of Billings. It was simple. Worn roof, paint a little faded, but with a wooden balcony that led straight to a small garden at the back. I don't know how to explain, but my heart recognized that place before my eyes even understood what they were seeing. I leaned against the gate and stood there, watching. There was a good silence around, a silence of a new beginning. The next day I returned. I talked to the owner, a gentleman named Glenn, who seemed more interested in finding someone to take care of the house than in profiting from it. "It's small, but it's good sold," he said, as if he were talking about an old dog. I signed the contract calmly. His hands were steady, his chest was light. For the first time in a long time, I wasn't buying peace for others. I was buying my space to breathe without fear. I grabbed the keys, and on the way to the door, I stopped in the middle of the sidewalk and thought, that's it. Now it's just me, and that's okay. In the following days, I set up the nest with affection. I bought a simple bed, a round table, 2 light wood chairs, a blue curtain that reminded me of Rose's eyes. He didn't need more. In the backyard, I planted rosemary, mint, chives. Not because I used it a lot, but because I like to see living things growing near me. I hung some old photos on the living room wall. Me and Rose at Coney Island, Ashley as a little girl on my lap, my father in the overalls from the workshop. Each frame was an anchor that reminded me of where I came from, and everything I've ever been. And look, I'll tell you, freedom has nothing to do with luxury. It has to do with not asking permission to exist within your own home. I woke up, made my coffee, sat on the porch and listened to the birds. Time started to move more slowly. My silence was mine. My space was mine. And you know what? For the first time, my roof harbored no ingratitude. There was no fear in the corners, no looks of contempt in the kitchen, just the noise of the kettle and the smell of bread and butter. Sometimes we spend so much time trying to fit into the lives of others, who forgets what it was like to live in their own. And starting over, even if late, is a gesture of courage. It's like planting flowers on land that has already been trodden on, and to see them born. But it was in the late afternoon, while I was sweeping the balcony and arranging the ceramic vases on the step, that I heard a noise of a car stopping. It was not a neighbor. It was someone who shouldn't know where I was. I went down the 2 steps with the broom in my hand, and when I looked at the sidewalk, my heart jumped strangely. Because that person, I hadn't seen it in years, and what she said as soon as she saw me moved me in a way I didn't expect. Want to know who it was? So stay here with me. Because the past decided to knock on my door, and this time he came with teary eyes. I had lost count of how many days had passed since I left that house, and with it, all the family fantasy. The time on the south side was more tame, as if the world had turned down the volume just to let me breathe peacefully. But on that Saturday, just on Saturday, I knew that the silence was going to break. It was the day of the trip, the renewed honeymoon that Ashley and Cole had sported so much for weeks. First class, 5 nights at a beachfront resort in Hawaii, tours scheduled, romantic dinner included, everything paid for by me before the snap. What now? Now the card was blocked. Reservations cancelled. The flights released for other names. I knew this because I was the one who erased every trace of my money from their lives. I did it calmly, without hatred, just with the firmness of someone who understood too late that limitless generosity becomes a trap. The phone rang at 7:43 a.m. Unknown number. Answered. On the other side, the sound of people walking, loud voices, loudspeaker noise. It was the airport. "Dad?" Ashley's voice came trembling, but still carrying that disguised pride she always wore when she wanted something. "The company said that the reserve no longer exists. Did you cancel it? Was it you?" I took a deep breath. I looked out the living room window where the light came in, touching the wooden floor like a hug. Yes, I was. Her silence on the other side lasted 3 seconds. Then came the trampled words. "How could you do this to us? Me? You knew we were counting on that. I lost work, packed bags, organized everything. It's my wedding anniversary, Dad." Hearing that hurt me, not because she felt betrayed, but because she still didn't understand. I still thought I was an extension of her wallet, a shadow to pay bills in exchange for contempt. "Ashley," I said calmly, holding the phone in one hand and the cup of coffee in the other, "you called me heavy. Now travel with what you carry." She did not respond immediately. I only heard the unbalanced breathing, like someone who was slapped that I didn't expect. Then came the crying, and it wasn't a cry of regret. It was the cry of those who saw the fountain dry up, of those who saw the structure collapse without a foundation. The call dropped without saying goodbye. The phone went silent, and there, in that stillness, I realized that their fall didn't come with noise. It came with absence, with the lack of what has always been there, sustaining everything in silence. And that's where the part that no one teaches is. There are people who only realize the value of a presence when it disappears. But little did I know that Ashley's crying was just the beginning. Because that same night, something unexpected happened, something that caught me off guard, a visit, a ticket. It's a request I never imagined hearing. Do you have any idea what it was? So get ready, because the game is not over yet, and the last card was about to be played. It was on a cloudy Tuesday, one of those when the sky seems to sigh along with us, that I heard 3 light knocks at the front gate. I got up slowly, already imagining that it was the guy from the market delivering the milk and bread. But when I opened the door, I saw a figure that I didn't expect, or rather, that I even expected, but not so soon. It was Ashley, in a light dress, her hair tied in a bun that she only wore when she wanted to look sweeter than she was. In her hands, a box with oatmeal and chocolate cookies, my favorite since she was a child. "Hi, Dad," he said with a forced smile that did not touch his eyes. "I stopped by to see you, to know how you're doing." I opened the gate without saying a word. I nodded, offering passage. She entered, looking at the house curiously, as if she were evaluating every detail. It was cute. "Simple, but cozy," he commented, running his hand over the doorframe. "I brought these cookies. I know you liked it." I thanked her with a wave, and invited her to sit on the chair on the porch. I sat on the other, crossing my legs calmly. She was silent for a few seconds, pretending to observe the garden, but I knew she didn't come to see flowers. He came to see land. Dad, I've been thinking about us a lot, in everything that happened. I think we could start over, leave the past behind. She spoke and smiled, but the words were too straight, too much rehearsal. I miss you, and I think we can still be family. I looked at her with the calm of someone who no longer expects anything, no excuses, no hugs. I just watched, and I let her go. We heard you made a New Testament, she blurted out, almost as if stumbling over the sentence. Uncle Randy commented to us, he has a lawyer friend who said that maybe you were too hasty, These roles are sometimes difficult to understand. Maybe you've signed too much. We could see it together calmly. And then there, in that slurred and poorly disguised speech, came the raw truth. She was not there because she missed her. I was there to try to undo what was already sealed. He came to probe, manipulate, reverse, and all this disguised as affection. I nodded, made a sound with my mouth, and pretended to understand less than I did. It's maybe even. These roles are confusing. We see that, yes. And he smiles. Not a smile of joy, but of someone who has already seen the game and no longer intends to sit at the table. We stayed there for a few more minutes, she talking about the weather, the neighbor's dog, a new job opening that Cole was trying. All with that tone of someone who wants to look light, but carries a weight hidden in his pocket. Before leaving, she stood up, hugged me sideways and said, "Think carefully, okay, Dad? We only want the best for you." I closed the gate behind her, watched the car disappear on the corner, and went back inside. I took my brown-covered notebook, the same one where I wrote down the values of the past, and wrote on a loose line on the last page, "They are back, but it's not for me." Then I closed the notebook, went to the kitchen, prepared my coffee, and left the cookies intact on the table. Because even the taste changes when the intention comes sour. There are things that we live and keep, but maybe by telling, we help another heart to breathe. Like this video and sign up, and let's make this story reach those who need it, because there are people out there who are going through the same pain. He just doesn't have the courage to tell. And do you think it ended there? That same week, a letter arrived in the mail, no sender, handwritten, and with a request that no parent would want to receive. Do you want to know what was written? So follow me, because there are things that not even time can silence. That day I dressed as if I were going to a wake, white shirt well ironed, dark pants, clean shoes. But what died there? It was nobody. It was an illusion. The illusion that a father's love is eternal, even when only one side cares. I arrived at the office earlier, sat in a brown leather armchair, one of those that sink a little and creak when we get ready. The building was in downtown, all mirrored, with a marble reception and people in a hurry, walking from one side to the other, as if they were in a hurry for everything except to hear. The lawyer, Mr. Lambert, was a man of few words, the kind who talks looking into the eye and keeps silent as strongly as he keeps secrets. He offered me a glass of water, but I refused. I had swallowed too much in my life. 10 minutes later, Ashley and Cole arrived. She had her eyes painted too much, as if makeup could hide the wear and tear of her soul. He with that blazer he wore at weddings, looking confident, or pretending. They sat in front of me. Ashley tried to smile. "Dad," he said quietly, with a sweetness that hadn't been there for months. I just tilted my head in response. Mr. Lambert opened a black folder, took out a sealed envelope with my name on it, and began. "This is a partial reading of Mr. Melvin J. Grant's will, made at his request in life, for clarification and legal record. The content presented here reflects decisions made freely and consciously." Ashley sat in her chair. Cole crossed his arms. I remained motionless. "I declare that after reflection and by express desire, all movable and immovable property, financial investments and rights linked to my name, become the possession and responsibility of a private foundation, to be created with the objective of offering shelter, food, and legal assistance to elderly people abandoned or mistreated by their direct families. Ashley turned pale. The color came off her face as if someone had pulled the cloth off a dinner table, and the cutlery of the farce began to fall one by one. Cole coughed, disbelieving. "That must be a joke," he murmured. Mr. Lambert, like a silent judge, just kept reading, without raising your voice, without interrupting the rhythm. In my desire not to prolong the coexistence with unrealistic expectations, I also declare that Ashley Marie Grant and Cole Daniel Hughes will not be beneficiaries of any part of the inheritance, directly or indirectly, unless they enroll in the foundation as volunteers and provide continuous service for a minimum period of 2 years, without pay. Ashley exploded. "You're doing this to punish us. This is cruelty." I looked at her with the same calmness with which one looks at a candle that goes out. "You didn't lose my money. They lost the chance to have a real father." The silence that followed was thicker than any scream. Cole stood up, began to question the legality, to yell at the lawyer, to threaten prosecution. But everything there was already documented, sealed, signed, recognized by a signature and witnesses. Lambert only replied, "Mr. Melvin is in full mental and legal condition. All decisions were guided and reviewed. There is no loophole." Ashley, instead of confronting, cried, but it was a cry without roots. A cry of those who cried for what they failed to earn, not for what they destroyed. I stood up slowly, put on my hat, thanked Mr. Lambert with a firm handshake, and before leaving, turned to them one last time. "You have confused silence with weakness, but today you heard my silence scream. And that there are stories that only hurt because we insist on writing chapters that should have already ended. But you know what? The last chapters are always the most important. It is in them that the outcome lives, and there is still one last page to be turned. Do you know what happened after this reading? Something that no one expected, something that made me realize that even in the middle of the fall, a gesture that shakes everything can be born. Want to find out? So stay with me. Because forgiveness, sometimes it comes disguised as a choice. I changed my number on a grey Monday without noise, without fanfare. I went to the operator, chose another SIM card and asked them to deactivate the old one. When the attendant asked, "Are you sure, sir?" I just smiled from the side, ringworm more than ever. After that, I went on social media, the same ones where I saw Ashley post a photo with the caption, "Family is everything," on the day she left me with a suitcase on the sidewalk, and blocked them both. One by one, every profile, every shadow. Then I entered the bank's application, added a simple instruction: any attempt by third parties to contact or request, deny immediately. And then, for the first time in a long time, I turned off my cell phone, and I didn't miss anything. The world has become quieter, cleaner, a good silence, you know, the one that does not weigh but relieves. The next morning, with the small suitcase on my back and the ticket bought, I went to Billings Airport, a direct flight to Seattle. My sister Martha lives there. We haven't spoken properly for 26 years, not because of fighting, but because of negligence. I chose to give myself to my daughter. I thought that family was the duty of one. My mistake. While waiting for boarding, I ordered a coffee and sat near gate 12. I saw a family laughing with 3 children, a grandmother distributing snacks, the father trying to organize the tickets, and the mother taking off the coat of one of the little ones. It was a beautiful mess. And I thought, my family was just a facade. It was wrapping paper in an empty box. When they called for boarding, I took a deep breath, not because of the fear of the plane, but because I knew it wasn't just a flight. It was a crossing, to go from a time when I explained myself to another when I only existed, without justifying, without apologizing for taking up space. I entered the aircraft with slow but steady steps. I sat in the aisle seat, looked out the window, and when the turbine roared, I let my chest roar with it. Not of anger, but of liberation. There, In that sky, I was no longer a rejected father. It was just a man going to find what was left of himself. Can you imagine what awaited me when I arrived in Seattle? Because I myself had no idea what that reunion was going to awaken. But I'll tell you. Because there are things that we leave behind thinking it's over, and she's just waiting to be remembered. I returned home a week later, not in a hurry, nor with nostalgia. I came back because I wanted to, at the right time. The small house on the south side still smelled of new wood and filter coffee. The plants I left in the windows were alive, even without watering. They seemed to understand that those who live suffocated for a long time know how to wait for the right air. I put my suitcase in the corner of the room, took off my shoes, and let my feet feel the cold floor. It was a simple floor without a Persian rug, but no one called me a nuisance there. I went to the balcony, turned on the old radio I found at a fair, and let the sound of the blues fill the air. That slow, drawn-out, lamenting music, but also strength. I sat in the rocking chair and watched the sunset, the sky tinged with orange, children playing across the street, a dog barking for no reason, and I was there, entire. For the first time in a long time, I didn't feel that someone was missing to listen. Silence was not loneliness, it was peace, and it wasn't because I forgot everything I lived. No, on the contrary, I remembered everything. The way Ashley jumped on my bed when she was little, asking me to tell the story of the bear who wore a tie, from the smell of her hair when I picked her up from school, from the sound of my wife's laughter in the kitchen when I tried to cook and just made a mess. But along with these good memories, others also came. The impatient look when I forgot the alarm on. The phrase, "you are a burden," is said as someone who throws away a plate. And as much as it hurt, I understood there on that balcony that we don't need to erase the past to move on. You just need to stop living inside it. We, as fathers, promise a lot. I myself promised that I would take care of her until the end. But no one taught me that there is a point where taking too much care turns into losing yourself. And that's what I did for many years. I lost myself to support the dreams of others. But not now. Now I found myself in every detail. In the cup of coffee, in the smell of the mint I planted in the backyard, in the photo of my wife smiling on top of the dresser. I still missed it, but he felt no regret. That's it. This is worth more than any delayed apology. I took pen and paper, the kind that glides lightly, as if they were in a hurry to take off what weighs on our chests, and I wrote a letter, addressed to any parent who has forgotten himself, not to teach anything, but to share. I wrote about love, about limit, about how we can love a lot and still need to leave, about how silence is sometimes a cry for help, and sometimes it's just a well-deserved rest. I left the letter with the will, inside a blue folder, with a note. Do not seek inheritance here. Look for history. And while the blues continued to play, I leaned my head against the back of the chair and closed my eyes for a few minutes. I didn't sleep. I just took a deep breath. Do you think that was the end? Well, know that life, even after everything, was still preparing one last scene for me. A simple gesture, but that disarmed me entirely. Want to know what it was? So follow me until the end, because sometimes the strongest outcome is not screaming. It is silence with truth. Today, as I walk along the banks of the Yellowstone River, I feel time slip away like this cold, steady water, firm, silent, and impossible to hold. I see the reflection of my face there and recognize each line I carry, not as marks of pain, but as scars of those who survived and chose to continue. Ashley and Cole. I never saw them again. After the reading of the will, they disappeared as if fleeing from their own conscience. They told mutual friends that I was cruel, ungrateful. I didn't have to answer, because those who live on lies drown in their own echo. And me, I really live. I met my sister Martha again, and with her, the part of me that had been forgotten for decades. We have coffee together almost every Sunday, talk about when we were children, and laugh as if life had given us time to sow what was left. The house on the south side today smells of cake in the oven, of old radio playing Ella Fitzgerald, and of peace. Much peace. They thought I was weak because I kept silent, but the silence was the sound of my strength. I learned that love, when it becomes an obligation, turns into a prison, and that forgiveness isn't about forgetting. It's about no longer carrying what destroyed you. We spend so much time trying to be everything to someone that we forget to be whole to ourselves. But life, my friend, she charges, and when he charges, it is not with a shout, it is with absence. I left, and that's when they learned the value of who they had always been. Not because I wanted to teach, but because disappearing sometimes is the only way to be heard. If you've made it this far with me, I really want to thank you. Not only for listening to my story, but for allowing myself to exist in it with dignity. I know there are a lot of people on the other side who have carried more than they should, who have already annulled themselves for love, who have already been silent when they yelled at you. So if this piece of my life can become a mirror or a hug for someone, help me carry it forward. Enjoy this video. It's like a hug that warms and supports this little corner here. And sign up too, which is like an invitation to come back to this cafe whenever your heart tightens. Tell me in the comments of which city you are listening to me. I like to imagine that there are people scattered everywhere, forming an invisible bond of stories that understand each other. And if you want to know when you have more, activate the bell. That way you don't miss out when the coffee is brewed again. Don't go away yet. Listen to the next true story that will appear on the screen. Always remember, each wrinkle tells a story, and each story carries a strength. Watch the next video here on the channel with another incredible story.